Ari Aster's Hereditary. I mean, this is a movie you don't just watch, right? It's one you kind of have to survive. It's a film that just burrows deep under your skin and stays there, leaving you with this profound sense of dread and a whole lot of questions. So today, let's pull on those threads and see if we can figure out what makes Hereditary one of the most genuinely unsettling horror films in, well, a very long time. Okay, so right off the bat, you run into this really weird contradiction. You've got critics just raving about it, a staggering 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. But then you look at what audiences thought, a D+ cinema score. That is a massive, massive gap. So what gives? Why is a movie that's hailed as a modern masterpiece also one that left so many people feeling confused or maybe even a little angry? That's the puzzle we're going to try to solve. To really get to the heart of what Hereditary is doing, we have to look past all the ghosts and the creepy cult stuff, just for a minute. Because underneath all of that supernatural horror is something way more real and, honestly, for a lot of people, a lot more terrifying. A raw, brutal, and unflinching look at family grief. And the way it portrays that grief is so powerful that it actually bleeds over into the real world. A critic named Rich Knight wrote this line after his own mother passed away because he saw his own awful experience reflected so perfectly on screen. This shows you it's not just a scary movie. It's a story that taps into one of the most universal and painful human experiences, losing someone you love, suddenly and violently. And at the center of all of this is Toni Collette's just unbelievable performance as Annie. After her daughter Charlie's horrific death, her character becomes this emotional black hole. She's so completely consumed by her own private hell that she basically abandons her husband and her son. She becomes a total stranger in her own house. And it's a painfully realistic look at how trauma can just hollow you out from the inside. You know, this actually connects to a bigger idea. Some people argue that the horror genre is the perfect way to explore grief. I mean, think about it. What does a monster do in a horror movie? It smashes the hero's world to pieces and forces them to accept a new, terrifying reality. Well, isn't that exactly what a sudden, tragic loss does? It makes you feel like you're being haunted by the past, living in a world that's been fundamentally broken. C.S. Lewis just nails it with this quote. That fluttering in your stomach, that antsy feeling, the constant sense that something awful is about to happen, the physical sensations of grief are almost identical to the physical sensations of fear. So Hereditary is basically using the language of horror, which is fear, to communicate an emotion that is often just too big and too overwhelming to put into words. But, okay, let's be real. This isn't just a story about a family falling apart because of grief. The movie is constantly messing with us, asking us to question everything we're seeing. Is this a family that's just collapsing under the weight of its own psychological trauma? Or is there something else, something genuinely evil, pulling the strings from the shadows? And this brings us right to the central debate of the whole movie. You can really watch Hereditary through two completely different lenses. On one hand, it's a very literal story about a demonic cult. But on the other hand, you could see it as this powerful, terrifying metaphor for the horror of inherited trauma and mental illness. So let's look at the evidence for both sides. All right, so if you're on Team Supernatural, Ari Aster leaves you a whole trail of breadcrumbs. You see the creepy sigil of the demon Paimon carved right onto the telephone pole that kills Charlie. You see weird words on the walls like liftosh, which is Hebrew for open. And I mean, come on, Joan's seances. They actually work. These are not just random spooky things. They're very specific clues pointing to a very real occult plot. But then, you can build an equally strong case that it's all a metaphor. Think about that gut-wrenching scene at the support group. Annie lays out her family's devastating history. Her dad had psychotic depression, her mom had dementia, her brother killed himself. We also find out about Annie's own terrifying sleepwalking episodes where she almost killed her own kids. And Peter's violent breakdown in class, that looks a lot like a psychotic break. From this angle, the demon Paimon isn't real. It's just a name for the genetic curse that's been haunting this family for generations. And Annie's miniature dioramas, they perfectly capture what's going on in her head. She rebuilds these incredibly traumatic moments from her life in miniature. It's this desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable, right? To put all that chaos and trauma into a little box where she can manage it. It's her coping mechanism, but it's also the perfect symbol of how powerless she really is against the forces, whether they're demons or DNA, that are destroying her family. Okay, so we've got the grief, and we've got this two-sided debate. But how does the film actually assemble all these pieces into such a terrifying machine? Let's pull back the curtain and take a look at the hidden blueprint of the whole thing. Right. This is the question that leaves pretty much everyone scratching their heads after the credits roll. The whole thing feels so complicated and confusing, but when you actually break it down, the cult's plan is shockingly methodical, even if it is completely insane. So first, we gotta meet the big bad himself. Paimon isn't just some monster the movie made up. He's actually a figure from real-world demonology, specifically from this old 17th century book of magic called the Lesser Key of Solomon. In these texts, he's a king of hell who can give his followers all sorts of riches and knowledge. But, and this is the important part, there's one crucial catch. He needs a male human body to live in. And that one little catch is the key to their entire horrifying plan. It's basically 3 steps. Step 1, the cult, led by Grandma, puts Paimon's spirit into Charlie when she's born. But he needs a boy, so step 2, they have to engineer her death to get the spirit out. And finally, step 3, they systematically break down Peter with trauma and grief, making him weak enough to become the demon's final home. It's a terrifying generational conspiracy that was in motion long before the movie even started. Look, understanding the plot is one thing, but that's not what makes the movies so scary. The real genius of Hereditary is how it makes us feel that creeping dread, long before we have any clue what's actually going on. And a huge, huge part of that is its incredible sound design. So, Ari Aster's main goal for the sound was to throw out all the usual horror movie tricks. No loud bangs for cheap jump scares. Instead, he wanted to create what he called a subjective and mind-altering soundscape. Basically, he wanted the sound to get inside your head and mess with your sense of what's real. And this quote from the sound designer Louis Goldstein just sums it up perfectly. Think about that scene right after Charlie's death. After that brutal, shocking moment, the movie goes almost completely silent. We just have to sit there with Peter in that car, in that awful, devastating quiet. Like Goldstein says, the silence is way more terrifying than any loud noise could ever be. It forces you to feel the full weight of what just happened. And the sound team went to some pretty wild lengths to achieve this. They actually created what they called evil room tones, specific, unsettling background hums for each room in the house. They hid this barely audible grandfather clock ticking in almost every single scene, like a constant subconscious reminder that time is running out. And for the dream scenes, they used tech to create this vacuum-like, unnatural silence. You don't consciously notice this stuff, but it's working on you the entire time, building this unbearable sense of unease. So we've seen the film as a story of grief and as a supernatural thriller. But the real horror, the reason this movie stays with you, doesn't come from one or the other. It comes from the way it mashes them together. And this right here is the absolute genius of Hereditary. You don't have to choose. The film isn't asking, is it a demon or is it trauma? Instead, it's using the supernatural plot, this inescapable, predetermined demonic plan, as the perfect way to make the audience feel what it's like to be trapped by hereditary trauma. That feeling of being a puppet, of having no control, of being doomed by forces you can't even understand. That's what it feels like to be cursed by a demon. And it's also what it can feel like to be trapped by your own family's history. And hey, don't just take my word for it. The director himself, Ari Aster, has basically said that at its core, this is a film about grief and trauma, and how those things can completely and horribly transform a person. The cults, King Paimon, all of it, they are just these masterful, terrifying tools to explore a very real, very human kind of horror. Which leaves us with one last haunting question that the movie forces you to think about. What's actually scarier? Is it an evil from the outside, a demon from a book that you can at least put a name to? Or is it something from the inside, something written into your DNA, a trauma passed down through your family that you can never, ever escape? That's the question Hereditary leaves you with, and that's why its horror is so damn hard to shake.